Morning. It is wonderful to be with you in a church that celebrates and laments together with all kinds of passion. And I just want you to know I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing what you are going through with this community. If this is your first time here, welcome. We live by a mantra here at Paradox, which is sermons are designed to start discussions and not end them. As I said earlier, we do not expect you to agree with everything that I said. We just hope that this starts critical conversations in your life that can lead you to be a more loving person, loving of God and loving of each other as well as loving of yourself. Now, we are going to tangibly practice this in January by introducing discussion groups that will go for 3 months. We'd love for you to join these discussion groups. If you're interested, talk to myself or Yasmin, but we really want to start discussions and have them as a community. So we'd love for all of you to join this from January to April. I have more details as it comes along, but I wanted to let you know about it because we'd love to see you there. Also, I just want to say thank you to everyone who makes Paradox Church possible by donating at paradoxgiving.com. I've been overwhelmed by your generosity from the start of this church, and I am so grateful for all that you do to make this church happen. Lastly, Hilary mentioned this earlier, but we are so grateful to the Schofields for leading out in our Thanksgiving outreach again. Darius Sanker also led out, and I think that's it, but we have a lot of people coming together to make this happen, and we're just so grateful for the donations you gave to make it so that people who are hungry can be fed. With that in mind, we turn to the book of 2 Timothy. We are in part 2 of our 2-part series in this book that is toward the very end of the Bible. Now, last week, we talked about how Paul, who is identified as the author of 2 Timothy, most likely did not write 2 Timothy. Now, we went into all the reasons for this, which are historical, theological, and literary, and the reasons why scholars don't believe that Paul wrote this. I went way into the language with that, but we're just going to start with that assumption, and I will be referring to the author of 2 Timothy as the author of 2 Timothy. The second thing that we need to talk about is it's important for us to acknowledge that this letter was composed about 100 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it's not like it was written right after Jesus rose from the dead. About a century passed, a couple generations went by before this letter was most likely written. So with that in mind, we talked about the thesis statement of this book last week or 2 weeks ago, and the thesis statement is that you do not need to be ashamed of the gospel. And we talked about how Christians today are ashamed of the gospel and what that actually means. Today we're going to look at a tiny passage of scripture. It's 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14 to 19, and I think it's rather telling, and it really informs a conversation about what this whole Christianity thing is about. So let's turn to 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14. The author writes, "Remind the Christians of this, and warn them before God that they are to avoid wrangling over words, which does no good, but only ruins those who are listening. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved by God, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly explaining the word of truth. Avoid profane chatter, for it will lead people into more and more impiety, and their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth by claiming that the resurrection has already taken place. They are upsetting the faith of some." The author goes on to say, "But God's firm foundation stands, bearing the inscription, 'The Lord knows those who belong to God, and let everyone who calls on the name of the Lord turn away from wickedness.'" Now, if you think that a Twitter beef is a big deal, imagine being called out in Scripture, right? Here you have two guys, Hymenaeus and Philetus, and they are making a claim that the author of 2 Timothy doesn't like. The claim they are making is that the resurrection happened. The author of 2 Timothy hears that claim and says, "Oh, no. This false teaching needs to stop." Does anyone else see a problem here? Because 100 years before this letter was written, the whole of Christianity is based on the idea that Jesus died, was buried, and then in 3 days rose from the grave in resurrection. And along come two guys, Hymenaeus and Philetus, and they get together and they say, "Hey, the resurrection happened." And the author of 2 Timothy says, "No, we can't have that here." Now, it's here that somebody might point out that the church would disagree with me. The church would look at what I'm saying and saying that these guys said the resurrection happened, and the author of 2 Timothy didn't like that, and the church would just give me a massive eye roll emoji, right? They would look at me and they'd say, come on, Craig, don't you know there are two resurrections? There is the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the resurrection at the end of time during the second coming of Jesus Christ. The author, they would say, of 2 Timothy is clearly stipulating that Hymenaeus and Philetus were telling the world the second coming had already happened, not the first resurrection. And I would say, oh, that's a great point. The problem is there's no distinction made in the text. It just says the resurrection. And what's interesting about this is the author of 2 Timothy seems to acknowledge that there is only one resurrection that happens, not two. And I will tell you that when I read this, I actually agree with the church on some level. And I look at the author of 2 Timothy and I say, this guy's got a problem. And the problem with this author is that there is a definition of the resurrection and his is too narrow for me. I actually like the church's definition a lot more. The idea that there are two resurrections. And to talk about these resurrections, we have to call them by their names. There is the resurrection of the past and the resurrection of the future. And both of these resurrections have severe implications for how Christians should live their lives today. So let's talk about the resurrection of the past. The resurrection of the past is based on the life of Jesus Christ, who most likely was a very real person living at a real time in a very real location. He lived in Judea in the 1st century CE, and he walked around a real city called Jerusalem, which you and I could go visit today if we had the funds. Now, a few years ago, I was fortunate enough to have the funds to go across the world to Jerusalem, and I got to go right through the city and walk in the same city that Jesus Christ once walked on. Now, it's here that this church behind me is a significant church in church history. This is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it is believed to house both the hill where Jesus was crucified and the tomb where Jesus was buried. And if you've been here, you know how much of a mind trip this building is, and if you haven't, you have no idea what you're in for. You walk in the building, and you turn to your left, and you see this kiosk here. And you ask yourself, what is this kiosk? And you start to walk closer, and you realize that there's a giant dome with light streaming down. And you ask the people around, like, what is this kiosk? And they'd say, oh, this is the tomb where Jesus Christ was buried and then rose from the dead. And you said, oh, it looked like that? And they said, well, not like that. We changed it once we found it because we wanted it to be a really grand entrance. So they destroyed all the ground around it in order to make it into a kiosk like that right now. Now, you can actually go inside the kiosk if you're willing to wait in line, and yes, there is always a line, and I have to tell you, I waited in line. I got through the line, and I got to the point where I was just about to enter the tomb where Jesus Christ supposedly was laid to rest and then rose from the dead. Now, I have to make a few qualifications before I tell you what happens next. If you ask archaeologists today, did Jesus Christ actually get buried here? Archaeologists would give you a very specific answer. They would say, it is highly unlikely that Jesus Christ was buried in that specific kiosk. Now, you would say to them, okay, then tell me where the most likely spot on the planet is that Jesus was laid to rest and then rose from the dead. Archaeologists would say, our best guess? Right there. But it's highly unlikely. But it's our best guess. And the reason for that is because it's preserved by church tradition, and it goes back to 1,700 years ago, and they would say, like, they found this spot about 300 years after the resurrection of Christ, so it's got a few centuries between the time when they found it and the time they said, this is the spot, but that's why it can be the most likely spot and highly unlikely all at the same time. So, I get ready to go inside the tomb. And I can't even imagine what I'm thinking because this is literally the closest I will be to the spot where Jesus allegedly rose from the dead or confidently rose from the dead based on what you believe. And I remember I went in there. I went in with two strangers. There's enough room in this tomb for 3 people. And I sat down and I put my hands right on the rock where they supposedly laid Jesus. And I looked to my left and the man next to me was chanting some religious chant that went on for a while. To my right, there was a woman who was crying tears of joy. And between these two people, I looked down at my hands on that rock, and I remember very clearly what I thought as I sat there with my hands on that stone. I thought to myself, God, I hope this is true. And this is kind of an embodiment of my whole religious experience. Religion chanting on the right or left, people with overwhelming tears of joy on the right, and a bunch of doubt in between. That feels like what I go through on a regular basis, right? Now, I have told this story before, and people always ask me a follow-up question. Well, did you think anything else? And my answer is no. That was it the whole time I was in there. They give you about 2 minutes, and all I could think was this thought. And when I tell people this, they're always a bit disappointed to hear that. I think what they really wanted me to hear me say was, oh my word, the resurrection is real and everyone needs to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem right now so that they can be convinced that the resurrection truly occurred. But I didn't feel that. And imagine if that was actually true. Only the rich people who could afford a trip to the Middle East could be convinced that the resurrection was true. We have this idea that the primary implication of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is whether or not we believe it's true. And we have this idea that the most important thing about the resurrection is whether or not you say, I believe it happened, or I believe it didn't happen. There's a problem with this. The problem is, all of a sudden, the resurrection, which is supposed to be this big, beautiful gift from God, from Jesus Christ raising from the dead, no longer is a gift, but instead becomes a gatekeeper to determine who is in and who is out. And do we really want the resurrection of Jesus Christ to be a gatekeeper to discriminate against others? I was hoping there would be a resounding no upon that answer. So, the resurrection of the past, of Jesus Christ, is not a gatekeeper, my friends. The resurrection of the past is immeasurable grace. It's a gift from Jesus Christ that Jesus rose from the dead. It is not a burden. It is not some sort of measurement that you need to live up to. It is not a belief to be believed or not. It is all a gift, and you step into it from the moment you are born. None of us did anything to help the resurrection along, right? We just breathed in air, and all of a sudden we were breathing in the air of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, adults are really bad at this. You know who's really good at it? Kids, right? If you want to see kids just accept immeasurable grace, take them trick-or-treating. They don't understand what's gotten into everybody, but all of a sudden, everyone on the block is handing out free candy, and they can barely wrap their minds around it. How great is this? Free candy from every stranger I meet? My parents tell me not to take candy from strangers 364 days a year. Then this day comes along, and the rules are changed. It's just grace. And kids are so good at just looking at all of life and viewing it as a giant gift. This is where children are our teachers as adults. And we can learn to be more present and accept the grace of gift that we are born, the gift of grace that we are born into, that is our everyday existence. When you consider the implications for this on a daily basis, when we believe in the resurrection of the past, we see our entire existence as an act of immeasurable grace. That's what it means to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, there is a second resurrection. And the second resurrection is the resurrection of the future. Now, I grew up in church, as did many of you that are gathered here. And I have to tell you, I heard churches talk about the resurrection, the second coming of Christ, in a very specific way over and over again. Tell me if these phrases sound familiar. People, get ready. Jesus Christ is coming back soon. Another one, if you died in a car crash today, would you be right with God? Yeah, a little groan on that one, huh? This current news event is a sign of the times. Can I get a hallelujah? Yeah, I'm not sure that's the appropriate response, but I'm glad you're with me. What do all these things have in common? The church, fear is correct. The church threatens human beings with the second coming of Christ. It is a threat. Hey, Jesus is coming back soon. Get in line and get in church. Hey, Jesus Christ is coming back soon. Be careful because you don't want to be on Christ's bad side. Hey, Jesus Christ is coming back, and guess what? Your eternal salvation is at stake. You better get right with God right now. Christians, unfortunately, have taken the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the future and have turned it into a threat. My friends, I have good news for you this morning. The resurrection of the future is not a threat. The resurrection of the future is abundant hope. If the second coming isn't wrapped up and saturated in hope, then why would we call it good news? If it's not good news, then let's all tell the world that we've got some bad news for you. Jesus Christ is coming back. And when I think about what this resurrection of the future means, I have to tell you that I am much more hopeful than people originally think that I am. To tell you about that, I want to tell you a story. Every year, my wife and I have a tradition on our anniversary. We watch our wedding video together. And each year we start talking more and more about how much younger we look and how much we didn't know back on that day when we got married in 2010. And it was just this thing that we always do, and we love watching this video together. But there's this moment that happens every year where the camera people turn to the congregation or the crowd that's gathered there for the wedding, and we see someone who died in the last year. And it's this real moment of sadness because the people at our wedding we really loved. And all of a sudden, it's this tangible reminder that that person is no longer with us. And as each year goes by, there are more and more people that we see that have passed away. Every time I watch this video, I have a hope that wells up within me. I have a great hope that we will see our loved ones again. I don't know all the specifics. I don't know all the details, but I have a hope that we will truly see them face to face once again because I believe that would be immeasurably good. And when I consider that immeasurably good is what the resurrection at the end of time is, that's why I trust it. And if we're talking about being able to conquer the grave and be reunited with those who have passed away before us, we're talking about the resurrection of the future not as a threat, but as something that should overwhelm us with hope today. When you think about our lives on this planet, when we believe in the resurrection of the future, we look forward to tomorrow with an abundance of hope. It's easy, I would even say it's lazy, to be cynical. It's too easy for us to say, oh, everything's terrible, why even try? But people who believe in the resurrection of the future say, no, there's something good over the horizon, so I will live my life accordingly, and I will have hope even when the world seems hopeless today. This is the testimony of the resurrection of the past and the resurrection of the future. And while most churches I know affirm that there are two resurrections, I want people to know that I affirm that belief as well. But there is a third resurrection that the church does not speak about often enough. And to talk about that third resurrection, we got to talk about church history. Who's excited? 3.5. We'll get the rest of you by the end of this sermon. So there's this Bible, right? And I have heard my whole life that if you want to know you're a real Christian, you'll wake up early, you'll open the Bible, and you'll spend 15 minutes a day with the Lord in prayer and reading the Bible, right? There's one problem with this claim. Daily devotional readings of the Bible have only been available to the majority of Christians in the last 500 years. And for 1,500 years before that, Christians mostly did not own a Bible. It's only because of the printing press that we can own the Bible today. And so this practice, this idea that I need to read the Bible every day, it's a rather liberal idea in the Bible's history, if you get what I'm saying. Not only that, but if you go back 1,000 years before the Bible was printed in mass, you get to some ecumenical church councils. And these ecumenical church councils around the 4th, 5th, and 6th century CE got together and they started making lists of different writings that should be included in a New Testament. Before these church councils existed, there was no Bible. And the church existed without a Bible for 400 years, 4 centuries. Most Christians are not aware of this. Because for most Christians, there's this idea that the Bible is the foundation of our faith, but it existed for 4 centuries without any scripture, which raises the question, what on earth is the church doing if it doesn't have a Bible? There is two things specifically that early church people did. The first thing is they practiced the sacrament of communion. And the second thing is they witnessed to the resurrection. My friends, the church's original purpose was to be a witness to the resurrection. And before they had a sacred text, they had a story about resurrection, and the entire church was built on that story. This church original purpose was to be a witness to the resurrection. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, that's great. I mean, there were people who were actually there when the tomb was empty, and they loved it, and they told the world. But what happened when those people what happened when those people died? What happened when we lost those people who were original witnesses to the resurrection? How is it that the church didn't stop meeting when those people died because they said, well, the last person who's seen the resurrection has passed away, so I guess our witness is done here? The answer to that question is because the Christians continued to experience the resurrection on a personal level after the last initial witness died. This is absolutely important for everyone in Christianity to understand today. Christians love to talk about the resurrection of the past and the resurrection of the future, but there is a third resurrection that I believe in, and that's the resurrection of the present. The resurrection of the present is incredibly important and incredibly under-discussed by Christians today. Now, this may sound weird to you, this may sound new to you, this may sound a bit mystical to you, but the fact is we have to talk about what it means to believe in the resurrection of the present. So let's ask the question, what is this kind of resurrection, and how is it different than the other two? To do this, to explain how this works, I want us to go back 2,000 years ago to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Imagine that you were there. You were the first person to see the empty tomb, and you saw for yourself with your own eyes Jesus Christ staring you dead in the face. After a few moments, Jesus disappears, and you're left saying to yourself, did I see that? Is that true? Did that actually happen? What would your life be like from that moment forward? Would you live in the exact same way? Or would something else start to bubble up within you? Because I believe that if I saw anyone who raised from the dead, I would look around, especially if I liked this person, I would look around and I would say, whoa, there's something good behind all of this. I don't know necessarily what it is, but the person that I loved is back, even for just a few moments, and there's something good steering the ship of all of reality that I can trust in from this moment forward. And I cannot stay the same after that moment as I was before. Now let's fast forward to the resurrection of the future. Imagine that you lived through the resurrection of the future. You saw with your own eyes Jesus Christ returning to earth, and you saw all of this and you started to see dead people rising up from the ground. Just imagine this. What would your reaction be? You would look around as all of this reunion is happening, as all of this glory is happening, as all this beauty is happening. You would say to yourself, oh, wow, there is something good behind all of this. There's something good steering the ship of reality. And when we talk about the resurrection of the past and the resurrection of the future, I think it can inform our understanding of the resurrection of the present. The resurrection of the present is any transcendent moment when we are convinced that something good is behind all of this. That's what the resurrection in the present looks like. And when you consider this church has gone for thousands of years through all kinds of generations, and the testimony is not, hey, the resurrection happened back then, but we haven't seen him in a while, so we're sorry, we hope he shows up soon. The testimony is, oh, no, the resurrection is real, and you can experience it today because I have experienced it. It's here that we read and understand that if we truly believe in the omnipresence of God, that God is everywhere, then every one of us should be able to experience the resurrection equally. God will not ask you to trust someone else's experience of God more than your own. That's not an omnipresent God. That is a God who is only available to some, and we don't believe in that God, do we? The resurrection of the present is not a myth. It is a reality that can be trusted. The resurrection of the present is extravagant love for human life because we are living human life right now on this big blue planet. When we believe in the resurrection of the present, and we trust that God can be found in the smallest and the biggest moments, we embrace today with all of its imperfections in love. This is the testimony of the resurrection of the present, and it is ultimately what the witness of the church is, to stand up and tell the world that the resurrected Christ occurred back then in the past, that the resurrected Christ is returning in the future, and most importantly, the resurrected Christ can be experienced right here, right now. My friends, we are a church, and what that means is that we are a community of witnesses to the resurrection now. And with that, I would like to invite up 10 people from this church to share their own testimony, how they have witnessed God moving and being resurrected in the year 2021, because 2021 hasn't gone according to plan, has it? It's not the perfect year, but we've invited all of them to share something about where they have seen the resurrection occur in their own lives, and this is the witness of our church, testifying that we are a community of witnesses to the resurrection now. We'll get set up here, and we'll go from there.
I'll start. My name is Thomas, and I'm here to tell you about how I have experienced the resurrection. I've known my best friend since 1985. For those of you that are thinking, I was born in 1985, welcome, I'm glad you're here. Over the years, my best friend and I typically spend 2 or 3 days a week together. We talk, eat, write, do projects, break things, fix things. He has this crazy popping lung thing, which makes him pretty susceptible to lung issues. His doctor told him to be very careful. So during COVID, during the pandemic, I didn't see him at all. A couple times across, a 20-pace difference and behind masks, but no closeness. And then the hope came along of the vaccine. And I got my vaccine, he got his vaccine. We got our second doses. 2 weeks later, we got together, we had dinner. We talked face to face. This is hard now with you talking like that. Okay. And we had a hug, and it was a beautiful thing for our friendship, and I was blessed that way.
Hello, my name is Maria. I'm sharing a surprising resurrection experience that I did not see coming. A little context, in 2009 when my divorce was final, the loss of my immediate family, an extended family, the in-laws, was profound and painful. Most of my in-laws lived in Bermuda, and there was no one banishing me from the island where I lived for a year, but I thought I had no reason ever to return. I kept in touch with a handful of exes, I call them, including my ex-husband's uncle. So when he told me he was dying from cancer, I knew he would not make it to celebrate my daughter's graduation from med school next year. Shortly after receiving this grave news, my daughters and I flew to Bermuda to spend some time with him. During the drive from the airport to the homestead, seeing the blue ocean, the greenery, familiar streets, limestone roofs, and brightly colored homes, I fell in love with the island again. We went for walks on the beach and on the golf course next to the homestead, visited homes and people that I have not seen in years. We spent time with our uncle. We spent time with an aunt-in-law who shared the importance of letting go of the past. She passed away within months of our dear uncle. My daughters and I were reminded on this trip how short and precious life is. Even now I can reflect on new memories that were created amid suffering, dying, and saying goodbye. I reconnected with the people I love and resurrected the love I thought was lost.
Hello, my name is Yasmin. I'm here to tell you about how I've experienced the resurrection. In March this past year, I had the privilege of going to Korea with my boyfriend. We quarantined for 2 weeks, and it was 100% worth it. We were allowed to explore, and one weekend in particular, we took a trip to the town of Gyeongju. That's a town with a lot of rich cultural history. On our first day, we took a walk in one of the parks there, and we saw a lot of beautiful, huge hills. And I was kind of like, what are those? My boyfriend told me that those were actually all tombs, burial mounds, and each one represented a person. I was hit with the thoughts of lasting effects after we die and some of the emotions that come with that. And I thought, what thing that connects me with someone from, a century ago, 2 centuries ago, 100 years ago. I was standing there in 2021 while there had to be countless other people feeling the exact same feelings and standing in the exact same spot that I stood. And it really hit me, and it reminded me about shared emotions and how life is beautiful. Although we may not be alive at the same time, we still have those shared connections with each other. And we get to connect in a way with people in different cultures, different eras, different times, and I think that makes life beautiful.
At this time, we're going to go to a very special guest / elder of ours, Jonathan Montplaisir, from all the way from Texas. He's an elder that represents our online community. So Jonathan, take it away.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm here to share with you how I experienced the resurrection. When Craig had asked me to share my testimony, I had just gotten a phone call that the deal I had in place to buy my dream home had fallen through. This house that I had dreamed about living in, that I had planned my future out in, that I had invested so much in, the deal was dead. In the process, I would lose about $5,000, and I lost all sense of security and future moving forward. And then Craig called me and asked me to share a testimony. And in that moment, I said, if God wants me to share a testimony, God's going to have to give me a testimony. The very next day, I got a phone call from my mortgage lender saying that there just might be a chance that I qualify for $20,000 of down payment insurance to help cover the cost that I was missing out. The deal wasn't dead, the dream wasn't dead, and my dream house wasn't dead.
Good morning. My name is Alvin. One way I experience the resurrection is when I'm wise enough to slow down, take the time, and sit a little bit more fully present with my children. For me, this is an invitation to relive and review all that is wonderful and all that is fractured with life. How do butterflies not lose their way when they migrate from Canada to Mexico and back again? Why do some people get to live in a house in a cul-de-sac and others in a tent in a field? How far is the next closest star? What would life be like if none of us had money? Will this fort of pillows and blankets withstand an impending attack from dragons? To contemplate these questions earnestly with my children, I can lay to rest, even if just for a moment at a time, some cynicism, prestige, the tyranny of the routine, and in these moments, hope, vulnerability, creativity, and the power and possibility of the moment can breathe new life again.
My name is Marilee, and I'm going to share a couple of things that struck me about resurrection this year. The first has to do with my family, and you've seen a lot of my laments and celebrations. My daughter and her husband and 2 children lived about 1,600 miles away in the middle of a pandemic where they knew only about 3 people, had 2 kids living at home that she was responsible for, and we couldn't go. We couldn't go. We didn't have a vaccine. They didn't want us traveling. They didn't want us to get sick. I felt so helpless, so anxious because they'd get sick, they'd need help, nobody was there. It was a very tough time, as so many of you have experienced. When we were able to get the vaccines and go to visit, it helped. I knew I could get on a plane. They moved here last July, and now even if the pandemic gets worse again, they're here where we can help. And to me, that was a resurrection and a loosening of anxiety and helplessness. The second thing I wanted to share, and this happened to me last year and this year, is flowers. Because they come up even if I don't pay any attention to them. It's a bulb in the ground. It comes back and I go, oh, wow, I forgot I had those planted. And they come back and they're beautiful, and I know that when everything horrible is going on around us, the flowers still come back and there is hope. And for me, that's resurrection.
Good morning. My name is Sally, and I would like to tell you about my experience recently of resurrection. A couple of weeks ago, my husband Paul and I went to Louisville, Kentucky, where Paul took some classes for continuing education. And on our trip home, we got caught up in a mess of the hundreds of flights being canceled. You probably heard about it. And in a nutshell, when we finally landed at LAX, our car was at Ontario, and our luggage was at Charlotte, North Carolina. So it was, and we had to spend an unexpected night in a hotel without luggage, and it just was a mess. And the next day after that hotel night at the airport, there were long lines everywhere of frustrated, anxious people trying to get their luggage, trying to reschedule their flights. But something happened where I feel like I stepped into a liminal space, a flow that I will call the Spirit of Christ. In the lines, people were sharing stories. We were laughing a little bit. When someone finally got up to the front of the line, people would say, I hope you get your bags. Good luck on the rest of your journey. I hope everything goes smoothly. There was a sense of community and connection. It was maybe what people call the Tao, where you step into a flow. And for me, that was the presence of Christ. And it's always so exciting when that enters our everyday, ordinary, mundane lives. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bev, and the way that I've experienced the resurrection in the last year has been incredible. I've been working from home as a registered nurse since March of 2020, and as a result of that, that has opened up a lot of experiences that I would have liked to have had but wouldn't have been possible. One thing is my mother is 97 years old, and she's been healthier during this pandemic than she has been in the past. I've been able to be blessed to spend every day with her. I forced myself to take lunch and go visit with her, sit with her. My brother's moved here from Canada and spent a lot of time with us. That never would have happened without COVID. Reconnecting with my family and friends and the nonprofits that are really important in my life have really brought me a lot of joy. And so there are good things. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christian. In my witnesses of the resurrection, they happen to me a lot of the time at work. I work retail, so I spend a lot of time at customer service. And a lot of the time I hear people use very colorful language when I tell them something they dislike hearing. After a few particular instances, I just kind of brush it off and pull the next customer from the line. But out from my vision, there's always someone who just kind of cuts in. And I don't remember her face, but she was the sweetest person. And I just remember her saying, "These other people can wait. I want to make sure you're okay. Do you need a minute? It's okay. You're okay." And she just quickly walked away after I told her, "I'm good. Everything's okay." And it's always those small instances of kindness after bereavement that you feel kindness. And yes, there's darkness, but there's so much more kindness.
Hi, my name is Hilary, and I'm here to tell you about how I experienced the resurrection. Since the pandemic, we've all experienced the disappointment of a canceled event, whether that's graduation, a retirement party, birthday party, or a wedding. And over the last several months, Adam, my fiance, and I have had the privilege of attending 3 weddings of our absolute closest friends. And I mean really our closest friends. We were in all 3 weddings. It was very expensive. It was a lot of time commitment. But besides that, we got to see our closest friends so happy with partners that we love and also surrounded by their loved ones. It's kind of a weird place to experience the resurrection in disappointment, but then followed by that, there was absolute joy. We waited for our friends to get engaged. We'd known them for years and seen how they met, where they got engaged, and where they wanted to have their wedding. We then proceeded to wait for the next wedding date and the next wedding date as weddings continued to be postponed. And I can't describe how much we anticipated the final date. To get the last email that says, this is the real day, we're going no matter what, to schedule flights and then to book giant Airbnbs for all of our friends, that was the resurrection to me. That ultimate anticipation and reward with love and joy.
Amen. My friends, yes, yes. My friends, there is something good behind all of this. And whether you call it the Christ, or you call it something special in the air, or you call it a chemical, or you call it the resurrection, the testimony of the church is that there is something good. May we see and embrace the resurrection of Christ in all.